Good evening and welcome to the July 13, 2021 Long Range Planning Committee or LRPC meeting. The LRPC is a subcommittee of the PC and its charge includes providing advice to the County Board on proposed land use plans. LRPC consists of all members of the Planning Commission, the PC, as well as invited representatives from adjacent civic associations and other county-appointed commissions with experience and expertise in the areas under consideration. Hey, Bill Ross, turn off your camera. This LRPC regarding the development of PenPlace includes representatives from each of the civic associations in 22202, Arlington Ridge, Aurora Highlands, and Crystal City, and representatives from the Disability Advisory Commission, the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission, Parks and Recreation Commission, Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and Transportation Commission. So thank you all for your time and review this evening and for representing your community and or constituency. Tonight, we will continue to consider proposed changes to the Pentagon City PDSP, including if these proposed changes are in the realm of consideration, in which case we will evaluate these in more detail at subsequent SPRC and Park Master Planning Review meetings. I am required to share some additional information regarding our virtual meeting protocols. Most of you have heard this before. For the safety of our LRPC members and county staff, we are holding a virtual meeting today. All of the participants are joining virtually. We are legally authorized to hold this meeting. Please turn off your phones unless you're joining via phone to reduce the interference. Thank you. We're legally authorized to hold this virtual meeting based on the governor's executive orders, legislation adopted by the Virginia General Assembly, and the County Board's Continuity of Operations Ordinance adopted in March 2020. This meeting is virtual. The meeting is available to join from the calendar invite on the Microsoft Teams link, from the LRPC webpage, from the project webpage for PenPlace, from the county events calendar, and at the top of the agenda. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option. If you lose connectivity during the meeting, please reconnect by phone. Otherwise, please keep your phones and other devices muted until you are called upon. For everyone joining us via Teams, turn off your video feed for now. Turn off sound to other devices. And if you're joining us when you're called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that's located on your meeting command bar. I do not have the ability to unmute you. The meeting chat is active if you have technical assistance questions. If you'd like to pose very brief clarifying questions to the larger audience, those will be monitored but not formally acknowledged. And if you want to register to make public comment. If you are interested in making public comment, type into the meeting chat your name and indicate that you wish to make a public comment, and this will be held at the end of tonight's meeting following the LRPC discussion. Do not use the chat for discussion or other comments. The chat does not serve as public comment, and all of the public comments must be shared verbally in order to be captured and recorded during the assigned public testimony period. And while we hope to be done by 9 p.m. tonight, if there's a sense we're close to reaching closure, I will query our group to go over slightly the time limit with the broader goal of providing helpful input and feedback this evening. Additional notes for our LRPC members. If the LRPC members wish to be recognized to speak on an item, please turn on your video feed or leave your microphone muted and raise your hand. I will use the video feeds that are on as an indicator of who would like to speak. Once you've been recognized, then unmute yourself, and once you've completed speaking, please turn your video feedback off and mute yourself again. If you have the hand raise function, you can use that too. In this virtual environment, I may miss you initially, and I apologize in advance. My co-chair, Leo Sarli, will try to alert me and will recognize you in order. If we have any LRPC members who joined via phone today without the video option, would you speak now and let me know? And please silence your other devices. Okay, seeing none. For other public speakers, you will be called on to speak at the end of the meeting if you register your intent to speak during public comment. You will be muted when your time has been concluded. Finally, this is a public forum. Tonight's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county's website. All information associated with the meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act FOIA requirements. Now, with that preamble behind us, I'd like to introduce the LRPC members before we move into our agenda. My name is Elizabeth Guerin. I'm the chair of this meeting, and I'd like to start with Planning Commission members first and then other LRPC members. We'll start with Leo.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Leo Sarli, and I'm with the Planning Commission, and I'm assisting Elizabeth Guerin chairing this process.
Thank you. Daniel?
Good evening, everyone. Daniel here with the...
There's something wrong with your connection, Daniel. Okay. Elizabeth Morton?
Hi, Elizabeth Morton, Planning Commission.
Thank you. James Schroll?
Thank you, Chair Guerin. James Schroll with the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Jim Lantelme?
Hi, Jim Lantelme, Planning Commission.
Nia Bagley?
Nia Bagley, Planning Commission.
And then I earlier saw Jane Siegel. Jane, if you're with us, do you want to introduce yourself?
Jane Siegel, Planning Commission.
Thank you. Could we move Jane up to the top of the group so that she's included there? And then I'd like to have the representatives from the civic associations and the commissions. Ben Devanzo?
Hi.
Oh, Tenley Peterson?
Hi, Tenley Peterson, Planning Commission, and I'll be leading the SPRC aspect of this project once LRPC wraps up. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Tenley. I'm sorry, Ben, go ahead.
Ben Devanzo, representing Aurora Island Civic Association.
Excellent, welcome. Krister?
Thank you, Chris All for the CCCRC.
Welcome. Darren? Darren Buck? Okay. Judy Freshman?
Judy Freshman representing Crystal City Civic Association.
Excellent. Thank you, Judy. Welcome. Pam?
Hi, Pam Van Hine with Pedestrian Advisory Committee. I hope you can hear me. Good to be here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Good to see you. And earlier I saw representatives from the Park and Rec Commission and the Urban Forestry and Natural Resources Commission, but they're not at the list of participants. So can you introduce yourselves and can we move them to the list? Thank you.
Hi, yes, Trudy Koopa, Parks and Rec Commission. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Welcome, Shruti. Steve Stockwell?
Steve Stockwell, Forestry and Natural Resources Commission.
Good, thank you. And I saw Carol Fuller.
Yes, but I'm not the representative. That's Judy Freshman.
Got it, thank you. All right, have I missed any Civic Association representatives or commission representatives?
Arthur Fox, Arlington Ridge.
Okay. Thank you. We were looking for a representative from your group. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jordan Lewis from the Public Art Commission as well.
Welcome, Jordan. Okay, and then tonight's critical county staff. Mr. Murphy?
Good evening, everyone. Tim Murphy with Arlington's Planning Division and the LRPC staff liaison.
Excellent, thank you. Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter Schultz. I'm the CPHD Current Planning Division representative for member for the site plan review part of this.
Excellent, thank you, Peter. Matt Matusek.
Good evening, everyone. Matt Matusek with the Planning Division as well.
Thank you. Chris Kreider?
Hi, I'm Chris Kreider, supervisor in the urban design section. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanne Gabor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joanne Gabor. I'm with DES for the LRPC and SPRC portion of this.
Thanks, Joanne. Jeremy? You're muted, Jeremy.
Sorry, I had to be the first one to do that. Got it out of the way. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremy Smith, landscape architect with the Department of Parks and Recreation.
Oh, great. Welcome. And Elizabeth Carragher.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Elizabeth Carragher and I'm a project manager with Arlington Public Art.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Please let me know if I've missed any county staff, commission members, or Civic Association reps. And as the applicant team presents information or answers questions, please introduce yourselves. Okay, so with that, we are ready to move into our agenda. We'll hear a presentation from the applicant tonight, changes based on feedback that they've received from the LRPC and other public fora. Then we'll have our LRPC discussion, and that's a discussion with the representatives who just introduced themselves. And after that, we will hear public comment. So we are now ready for the applicant presentation.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. Hi, my name is Joe Chapman, and I'm the Amazon's Director of Global Real Estate and Facilities focused on HQ2 in Arlington. Thank you all again for your time and involvement this evening. The team appreciates the thoughtful comments and questions that you provided during the last two LRPC meetings and through the public space engagement process. Tonight, we will follow up on a couple of important items from our last meeting. Dale Alberta with NBBJ will provide further development of the office buildings massing. We heard from the community members the desire to create more sculpted office buildings to help develop an iconic skyline. We believe PenPlace presents new opportunities to create a unique and special place that will integrate with the surrounding community. We look forward to sharing the massing evolution, and thank you for your input. We will also provide more information and updates on interior site circulation. There were some great suggestions last meeting on how to strengthen the north, south, and east-west connections through the site that we're excited to share, as well as more information on perimeter site circulation in Pudo. We look forward to continuing to work with you and other members of the community throughout the PenPlace site plan review process and public space engagement to create a similarly valuable and welcoming addition to the neighborhood. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dale Alberta with NBBJ to provide follow-up from the last meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Welcome, Mr. Alberta.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe and Elizabeth. My name is Dale Alberta, Design Principal with NBBJ, and I'm excited to share this portion of the presentation, which is around building massing and the evolution that has occurred since our last discussion with you. So if you go to the next slide, we'll start with what we heard from you last time. And this is a summary of several comments in the discussion we had. First of all, we were asked to study further the sculpting of the office buildings to break down the massing across the site, increase the variety and visual interest at the roof lines, which is a key element, and we think will have a significant contribution to Arlington's skyline. And then, of course, recognize PenPlace as an opportunity to do that. Consider moving the floor area from one building to another to diversify building heights. We'll talk about that and the challenges around that, okay? So starting with the overall site plan and the massing as we shared it with you last time, we shared the size of the buildings, the heights of them, the footprints that they occupy on the site, talked about the spacing of the towers and the various heights across the site. As a quick recap, we have 7 different buildings on the site, and the 3 office towers are each 22 stories and are slightly shorter than the Helix building, which is the tallest building on the site. They're accompanied by these much smaller pavilion buildings, which add a lot of interest and scale at the pedestrian level. What we have done since then has gone back and really looked at refinement around these buildings, looking inside out and outside in, and making them as efficient as we can for the owner. And we've realized that there's some gains to be made here in efficiency internally, which also will yield some more additional space on the site. You can see in the yellow zones here, the buildings have reduced in footprint in each case, and we'll talk about that and how that we think improves some of the site conditions. So First of all, it increases the tower spacing and the site porosity. And what we mean by site porosity is we mean visibility from the neighborhood into the site to this very important central space, to the helix, to the retail, and so on. And that also includes additional light into the space because the towers are slightly shorter in each case. There's an additional amount of light that can penetrate into the middle of the site. And of course, it helps reduce the bulk and the appearance of the buildings. I talked about efficiency of workplace already, and then we will start to, from that point on, think about the refinements in the facade and the massing, okay? So first, we'll take a look from eye level now at what this change gives us from the pedestrian point of view. And this is kind of a before and after set of images. And so from 12th Street, as you enter the site, mid-block along 12th, this is one of the major entry points into the site. Thinking very carefully about the spacing of buildings, the visual access you have as you're walking into the site, what you see, your access to sky and daylight. So what we had initially was an overall separation between Tower 1 and Tower 2 of 129 feet, and between Tower 1 and Pavilion 2, which is the small pavilion there on the left, of 57 feet. And then the clear walking space between Tower 1 at this closest point and a major landscape feature there, it was 19 feet. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that all of those dimensions have increased by 8 feet. And maybe it would be helpful, Kim, to just toggle back and forth for a moment so you can see in the image how the buildings have separated all the way up the towers. And that walking space went from 19 to 27. The space between Tower 1 and this Pavilion 2 has increased to 65 feet. And the overall separation of towers is increased to 137 feet. So I think visually it does start to really open up the site from this point of view. Okay, so moving to the next key entry point, looking at the entry point along Fern Street, we're calling this the Fern Street Plaza. So this is between Tower 2 on the right and Tower 3 on the left. And our previous layout had 82 feet of space between those two buildings, which is a generous amount of space in an urban context. But because of the efficiency we're realizing in the buildings, we're now increasing that to 90 feet. We're adding 8 feet here again. And you can see, interestingly, how even that 8 feet significantly improves your view towards the center of the site and the Helix building as you approach from Fern Street and this pedestrian crossing that will occur there. Okay. Next. So that kind of gives you a quick look at what the massing or the overall footprint changes have given us in terms of the pedestrian experience. Now we want to talk about the overall tower massing of the three office buildings and some new thinking that are prepared to share with you based on the comments that you shared with us last time. So what you see here is where we were last time we talked. And I'll quickly describe, our strategy at that point was to take the glass curtain wall, the exterior skin of the towers, and really just extrude that up as high as we needed to conceal all the rooftop equipment. As I'm sure you're aware, these office buildings will have a lot of elements on the roof that we don't want to see, cores, generators, cooling towers, things like that we don't want to be visible on the skyline. So our strategy was to raise this glass curtain wall up high enough to conceal all of that and make that a kind of an integral part of the overall form of the building. I think what that yielded was kind of a flat overall profile across the site, which you all shared some concern about, and a kind of a uniformity, I think, about how each tower meets the sky. So we've taken a fresh look at this and really wanted to take a step back and think about a way that we could enhance the skyline, but do that in a way that's really meaningful and honest about what's going on the project. So I'll explain what that means here in a minute. This aerial view looking down is just to give you a good sense of what we're talking about. So those areas highlighted in yellow are where we were with that curtain wall wrap that was visually screening all the rooftop elements. These bullet points here are kind of a summary of what we're going to talk about. Of course, we want to respond and think carefully about how we vary the skyline and the appearance of the overall project as it has a major influence on the Arlington skyline, number one. There's a number of pretty exciting sustainable strategies that are part of this project. And so one of our thoughts was, can we be more expressive about sustainability with this move? And it may not be apparent here, but one of the key features on the roof now is a set of photovoltaic panels that are collecting solar energy and contributing to the project's energy use. That's currently in the project, but it's not visible because of the screening that we're looking at. So our thought was, can we make that more integral and part of the expression of the project? And we'll share that in a moment. And then how we differentiate each of the buildings, make them more unique. So there's a clear set of three, but they each have their own personality or own way of expressing themselves at the top. Okay. So here is a very we purposely simplified this view. So we're really getting to the essence of the topic here, talking about skyline and building profile, stepping back near the top of the buildings. So this is where we were in diagram form. You can see from the northeast corner of the site. So we'll take the helix away here for a minute. We're not really taking the helix away, but we're just removing it from this view so we can get a clear view of the three towers and talk about our strategy here. So where we were, in the next view, if we take those screen walls off the buildings, you can see what gets exposed. You're seeing rooftop equipment and cores and other things on the roof that we need to conceal. So in the next view, what you'll see is a set of screen elements, these vertical walls that are sitting on the roof. And Kim, maybe you can point to those as a setback screen wall that conceals all of those elements on the roof. Sitting on top of those screen elements is what we're proposing to be an arbor or truss-like structure that carries the PV panels that are contributing an energy source to the project, and really utilizing these PV panels as part of the visual impact of the project. So not only do these buildings have each a unique profile at the skyline, but it's telling a pretty compelling story about both Amazon and Arlington's commitment to sustainability. So when you walk around the neighborhood, you can point to these and say, those are PV panels that are hard at work, contributing energy to both the project and the community. So, and you can see this is a very early sketch. We're starting to study how this might work in each case, in each building, thinking about the orientation to the south and maybe tilting these elements. Number one, to increase their efficiency, and number two, to create a dynamic profile on the skyline in each case. Okay. So that's what it would look like, the helix back in place, and how it relates to that special building. One thing I will say here, we want to be clear that these buildings are very different than the helix. The helix is meant to be a unique structure, and this expression at the roof line of the towers, we think ought to be complementary to the helix, but not mimic that in any way. Okay. The next slide, you'll see in a little more detail how this could work. On the left, you see where we were last time we met with that tall screen wall. There was a catwalk that allowed workers to access the facade to clean windows and so on. And then the solar panels and all the equipment were inboard of that. And again, just as a review, you'll notice that those PV panels were there, but they weren't really visible to anyone except people flying over the city. On the right, you see our new proposal where those exterior walls are dropped down just above the roof, and facade access can be gained just right off of the roof. And then there's a screen element pulled back behind where those guys are, right there where Kim's pointing. And then above that is an exposed expressive structure that you would see from around the community and from the streets below. that would carry these PV panels that are collecting solar energy. Okay. So that's the big idea. And I think there's a lot of next steps to consider. And here's a few of them. We want to continue to study the massing and changes within the height limits. Of course, all of this we're doing within the height limits that have been established, and we're verifying that with all of the right people. Want to make sure that all of this works with facade access. It's a really critical part of how these buildings work and how they're maintained, how the owner is able to clean the glass and all of that. So that's a critical part of this from a functional point of view. We're continuing to develop and test structural solutions for this expressive structure at the top of the building. So it looks beautiful, works well structurally, and is an efficient system. We're going to continue to develop the visual tools we provide you so that you can fully understand the visual impact of this and how it's really going to look. These are initial sketches, and as we work further, we're going to create some much more realistic looking renderings to help visualize this. And then we look forward to continuing the design refinement of this through the SPRC process. Okay. So that's the conclusion of my piece of this with regard to the tops of the towers. And I'm going to turn it over now to Grace with Escape to talk about site circulation.
Great. Thanks so much, Phil. Oh, I'm getting an echo. Okay, so maybe we'll try again. Does that sound good to everybody? Great. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Grace Stiles. I'm the project manager with Scape Landscape Architecture. I'm really happy to be here today. This first slide is aiming to distill and pull out 3 of the key things that we've heard from our ongoing processes. So that includes the last 2 LRPC meetings and then also our first public space engagement. So just reading these here quickly, we want to study the balance between direct and meandering pathways through the site, provide a more direct connection to Army-Navy Drive, and ensure that the pathways are appropriate for people of all abilities. So I'm excited today to kind of walk through some of the context and reasoning behind some of our design decisions, and then also share a few updates that I think you'll be happy to see. Next slide. So the graphics on this page are likely very familiar to many of you on the call, but we really want to acknowledge the significant efforts that are going on with the Pentagon City PDSP. So I am going to take a second to unpack a few of these diagrams because I think it's really important for our discussion today. So on the left side with the bikes and micromobility, and I assure you, anytime I say bikes, I am also referencing all of the other bike shares and scooters and everything, but for the sake of not getting tongue-tied, I'm just going to say bikes. But you can see here in the plan diagram, all of the efforts of the county to really create a connected and safe bicycle network for the neighborhood. And another really helpful tool that's come out of this is an ability to kind of categorize and talk about the level of safety for cyclists. And so that is represented in the graphic with the bicycle icons. So level 4 all the way on the left being the most kind of complex bike scenarios, comfortable for like a bike messenger or an urban cyclist, and then our level 1 facilities that are really appropriate and very safe for families and young children. So scooting back up to the map, you can see that PenPlace has been pegged for a level 1 bike facility on 3 of our perimeter streets. And we're really excited to be able to provide those. So we have protected north-south lanes on each street. We will have protected cycle track east-west on Army-Navy Drive. And then we have a protected northbound lane on Fern, as well as a dedicated southbound lane there as well. So we're really excited to be able to provide that level of infrastructure for this project. Scooting over to the right here, you can see the Green Ribbon pedestrian network, which is starting to have the same conversation about pedestrian networks that the county has so extensively had about the bike network. And it's very apparent from this graphic here that the county and our team alike see PenPlace as an integral piece of this pedestrian network. I'm really excited, and we really are going to unpack this concept of pedestrian safety and pedestrian network next. But just a small note, we have heard and seen the multimodal network also in the small inset to the bottom, just to keep in mind. Next slide. So on this slide again, just because that tool was so helpful in kind of categorizing the different levels of bike safety, we've really done something similar here for pedestrian safety, where we've categorized a level 3 as a high level awareness. That'd be something like a crosswalk, and then a level 1, which is a low level of awareness, and that's something like a park setting. And when thinking about PenPlace and thinking about, in the future, 5 years down the line, when this park is completely constructed, that's really what we see for this site, and we're really excited to be able to deliver, or have the potential to be able to deliver. So if you look at the graphic on the right, you can see that we're aiming to provide these level 1 bike facilities at the perimeter and the level 1 pedestrian facilities throughout the site. And we think that this really helps strike the balance between the multitude of feedback that we've heard throughout the LRPC process and also the public open space. Next. Speaking of that public open space process, this is just a small snapshot of a couple of the prompts that we asked our participants during that engagement opportunity. So the top left bar chart and the map on the right answer the question of where are you likely to enter the site from? And I think it's really no surprise that most people are going to be coming from the south, somewhere along 12th Street. Something that was hugely informative to us, though, is the prompt of how do you anticipate getting to and from PenPlace? And that is the bar chart on the bottom left side of the, thank you. And it's really interesting that a large portion of those participants responded that they would be walking to the site. So they'll be arriving by foot. And this just makes us feel really great about being able to provide this pedestrian first public space at the PenPlace site. Next. So a similar conversation about this kind of the site design has been a conversation about meandering or direct path circulation through the site. We're really trying to provide a park setting and not a campus setting. So in a campus, that circulation really focuses on door to door versus a park setting that really it aims to create an elevated pedestrian experience with a multitude and variety of different kind of experiences. We're also looking back at a couple of the public processes that have recently completed, those being Met Park and New Park, who had the opportunity to ask this question directly. And the poll results, as you can see, came back very similarly between the two projects, where about 65 to 67% of the participants preferred those meandering paths. So we're really trying to strike a balance between all of the feedback that we've heard. And so if you go to the next page, I'm excited to share that where we were at the last time we saw you was on the left side of the page here, where the primary east-west circulation route scooted down along the south part of the lawn area. What we've been able to do is optimize a path through this east-west connection that actually shortens up that route a little bit, but does make it a little bit more direct in nature. It does create a couple of exciting kind of experiential opportunities, and it maintains the program capacity of the Central Green. So if you go to the next slide, this shows that even though we've optimized this east-west connection, we did have to shrink the lawn ever so slightly, we are still able to maintain the program flexibility that is desired by the community. There's some direct quotes on the left, and this was just a few of the many voices of support that we've heard for the large gathering space at the center of our site. So you can see here that we're still able to accommodate concerts, special festivals, like perhaps like a winter market, a summer movie, and then plenty of space for that daily and casual use. Next slide. This again is a snapshot back in time. This is as if you're floating over Fern Street, looking out towards East Street. And so you can see where the pedestrian path scoops down around the south side of the lawn. If you flip over to the next slide, you can see how we've really been able to kind of straighten up part of this path. We've been able to add a few key experiences. So this now pulls this primary east-west circulation through the center of our confluence water feature, which we think is going to be a really engaging and exciting opportunity. We've also been able to introduce a seating grove at the south side of the lawn, which introduces shaded seating to the center of the site, which is also exciting. And then the furthest in the distance, we've been able to pull this pathway through a more lushly planted area, which is something that we've heard overwhelming support on in the forest area. So we've really been able to also include that experience further here in the south. The next slide flips around, and now you're standing on the east side of the site looking out towards the west at Fern Street, and you can really see how this has opened up those desire lines and the visual connection east-west on the site. Next. So the final conversation today has to do with the north-south direct circulation that we've heard a lot of desire for. So again, on the left side of the screen here, LRPC number 2, we had the meandering route leading up to the forest from the center of the site, and then gently coming down on the northeast corner. We've heard a lot of voices expressing a desire for a mid-block connection at Army Navy Drive. And so we're excited to report that we've been able to study this, and we feel very good about being able to provide this connection. So again, this is just a diagram. There's a lot more to come, but we are excited about the opportunity to be able to do this. It will help us break up the Army Navy Drive, and we should still be able to maintain the design integrity of the forest that we know is so beloved by many. So more to come on that. So these are our next steps. We also have an ongoing public space engagement process. So we are gathering lots of information from multiple different places, as this is also obviously a key piece of the LRPC and SPRC as well. That public space engagement is going to be slated for late summer or early fall. We are continuing our coordination with the county DPR, and then also, as mentioned, the design refinements with the SPRC and public space engagement process. So with that, it looks like I'm passing it off to John Savo, and he's going to take you through the perimeter circulation in Pluto.
Thank you, Grace. Yes, I'm John Savo, principal in charge for the architect and design team. And I'm going to take you through the last of the categories that we heard so much about in some past meetings, and that is about what's happening in the circulation around the site, and especially about pickup and drop off. So here's what we've heard in particular, the desire, strong desire, to have some protected bike lanes on all 4 sides if possible, and then provide sufficient pickup and drop off on the site, or around the site. Appreciation, we've really liked the fact that some of our early decisions have been well appreciated, such as the idea of creating these new signalized intersections that align with neighboring streets, and as well as the fact we've moved our loading underground and got back all that space that where the loading docks would have typically been on the buildings. So just a reminder of where we've been. At the last LRPC, we were introducing this idea of these 4 new signalized intersections, and very appropriately with our pedestrian crosswalks at each, so that right in alignment with neighboring roads and driveways, whether Elm or 11th or the drive across Army Navy, by lining them up at mid-block like that, there's enough distance from the other intersections to create a new signal. And so that's been a key part of the design, and that's where the vehicles now move underground, whether cars or trucks, to free up our site. We've also been paying attention to the new 12th Street South Transitway at South Elm and enhancing that intersection as well. We had talked about tabling potentially that intersection for pedestrian focus, but working with the county, it's been clear there's a number of reasons why that's not the way to go, but we still are on the idea of the intersection, and they agree with the crosswalks in the direction we're headed. And then we haven't settled on a final spot, but this is the last place we've been looking at for the relocated bus stop. We're working with the county to put that closer to 11th in the new intersection than where it currently is up towards Army Navy. And then bike infrastructure. All along from this design, we've been picking up on the county's desire for a protected cycle track on Army Navy, and same protected cycle track on South Eads. So that has been part of our scheme for some time. And next, we'll show you where we're headed. So I'm going to repeat a little something that Grace just mentioned, but I want to reinforce it because it's a key element, this idea of a protected bike lane northbound on South Fern and a dedicated bike lane southbound on South Fern. That is something that was not in the scheme previously. You see real value in that. It connects also to all our commuter bike entrances. We've also improved the cycle track alignments at South Fern and Army Navy. And we've added protected intersections, so there are bike protection islands at the right turns on each of the intersections. And then we have added a new bike share station near the helix, kind of where you see that yellow symbol there on the right hand side. We've already talked about the other cycle tracks, but I do want to mention also the little cross-hatched elements here on the plan, where we're providing bike racks all around the project on all sides. And with some of the input we've gotten, we've corralled more of those, including some right there along each of the main entrances to the site, so that they're inside the build to line, give you a place to kind of bring a number of bikes together. And then I would mention the employee locker rooms. You've already seen those before, though. Thanks, Kim. But you are able to get into these buildings, into your bike storage and locker rooms without going underground, without going through a loading dock, without going through a garage, but right off your protected bike lane into those areas. Okay. Now, addressing PUDO, we are still anticipating providing street parking on 3 of the 4 sides of the block. Not on Army Navy where we have the large protected bike lane, but we are looking to do that, and we can have as many as 50 spots the way we're headed. And those would be used potentially for some of the needs for drop off for shuttles. We can see that down below that the idea that it could be as many as 3 shuttles, and that we, learning from what's happened at HQ1 in Seattle, 3 spaces per office building for auto drop-off. So altogether, we'd need about 12 auto spaces and maybe 3 shuttle spaces somewhere around the block. So that is something that we would be needed to look at together with the county. They'll determine ultimately how many of those we have and where they go. But in addition to the 50 that we think we provide at grade, we can provide additional, almost the same number underground. And so I'm going to go to the next page to show you where that happens. And you did see this, I think, the last time, but I'm going to reinforce that with our auto entries on Eads and Fern, you can come directly in, and before you get to the ticket spreaders and gates, there is the ability to park in short-term parking, and that is immediately adjacent to those yellow passenger elevators that take you up to the towers and the open space above. There's also another one, as you can see, off Army Navy. You can get to any of these from any of the entrances, but that's the one that's most convenient for Army Navy, where it would be helpful to the community center and the child care that occurs in that area. So there's really quite a bit of opportunity for pickup and drop off, whether at grade or underground. The loading dock, finally, we're providing all the large loading berths required, and we can accommodate large trucks all the way to a WT67, but those will be very rare. More commonly are like a WT50 or 40 or an SU30. So trucks are handled underground, and we've added another 6 van parking spots because those are often used at Amazon and though not required parking. Then ample trash and recycling stalls. So we're continuing to work with DES and collaborating on this, and particularly I know that Joanne and the staff is waiting for the VISM analysis to be complete, which should be soon. And the idea is then to verify how each of the cross sections of these right-of-ways will be designed. We've been already created designs for that purpose, but we need to get the VISM study to confirm all the things that are going to be coming and going from the site to ensure we have the right design. We're going to be continuing to discuss this in the SPRC process. So more to come in the future. So just to summarize kind of what we've been talking about, addressing the three main categories of concern that we heard in the last two LRPCs. The building massing, we've adjusted, and we've actually, in each of the towers, we've shortened them in length and created greater spacing between towers, more openness for views and for sunlight. We've started to look at the tops of the towers to create a much more interesting skyline and one that will tell a sustainable story as part of a much larger story that is going on the site regarding sustainable design. The site circulation, we've talked about, Grace talked about creating a more direct, but still somewhat meandering east-west pathway. The idea of adding a major stair at Army-Navy that'll be directly connected near mid-block and the new intersection. And then the idea that we're still having other public space engagements for these things to be refined. And then finally on the perimeter circulation, adding the bike lanes in South Fern and the bike station near Helix are probably the biggest single moves that are different from before. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. You gave us good input. We've worked hard to try to address the things that we heard where we can address them, and we're excited about the direction that this is headed. We think it's only improved the design.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Alberta, Ms. Stiles, and Mr. Savo. So with that, we've concluded the applicant presentation. I'd like to move into the LRPC discussion, and I'd like to take this in parts. So we will focus our discussion first on the massing, then on the site circulation, and then on the perimeter circulation, including pickup and drop off, where you see it most relevant. And then at the end, if there's anything else that we want to raise or that we feel wasn't covered in those three areas, we can do it at that point. So let's start with questions on the massing. We'll go with, I see Jane, then James Schroll, Judy Freshman, then Krister. Jane.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. So I guess this question is directed at Mr. Alberta. I think it's really important for the community to understand and the developer to be speaking the same language, to define terms in the same way. I thought that what we had, just to go back to our last discussion, what we had expressed concern about was the sculpting of the buildings, not the spacing. So I think I just need to hear you agree with me or tell me how it is you don't agree that we're not talking about sculpting these buildings, sculpting them only in a very minimal sense. What you have responded with in your design idea about the spacing is a response to our request for sculpting. So we're really not seeing a sculpting, maybe only in a minimal sense. We're seeing spacing. So that's one thing I want to say, and then I'd like to talk about. Then I have two other points if I could just get them in. But that kind of troubled me because I'd like us all to be on the same page. You know, whether we agree or disagree, it'd be good to speak this sort of define the terms in the same way.
That's great. Jane, are your other two comments on the same issue, and I'll make note of them?
Yeah. Do you want me to just go forward with them and then we can get response later?
Yeah, there's a bunch of other folks who want to join. So yeah, go ahead and I'll make a note of them and then we'll identify where there's a group interest in the topic.
Yeah. And then that requires a response. I really need that response. So that's number one. Number two, I am still seeing three. On the bulky side, it seems to me from the renderings I've seen, office buildings at 22 stories high. You had said, Mr. Alberta, that you are within the heights limits and you are talking to Also tell me who the right people are. If we are not in that group, maybe I don't mean to be rude, but I'm not sure who the right people are. If you are saying that the framework entitles you to make 3 22-story buildings, and that's the end of the story, then I think we need to understand that. I think the community, and certainly speaking for myself, had hoped for a more of a varied skyline. I appreciate your effort. I heard you say this is meaningful from an environmental point of view, but I don't see it. Again, it's a tweak of the massing, and I don't think that's what I was expecting. So, okay, for massing, those are my two comments. I just throw in, I would very much like to see, maybe this doesn't fit here, it fits for the third category. I need to see some exhibits about how this development, this site, large site, fits into because it abuts the planning we're doing for the update. How does this look from Fern Street? How does it look? I think you've had exhibits about that, but I would very much like to see those again before we proceed to SPRC. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. James.
Thank you, Commissioner Guerin. So I just have several questions on the solar system that was discussed. So if you want me to run through the questions, I'm happy to do that and can take the responses offline if that's what you'd like. So first is the approximate size of the PV systems for each building. There was discussion of the wind tunnel study, wanted to confirm that the applicant will be looking at the wind loading of the proposed PV arrays as they do exceed the floor plate of the building and the roof of the building, which would increase wind loading. Would like some discussion of the anticipated performance of the system. That the orientation of the buildings is not ideal from a solar kind of siting, and the ideal is really an azimuth of 180 degrees, and it looks like that might not be achieved here, obviously. And some discussion of the angling of the systems. Some of this might be more appropriate for SPRC discussion, but if this is the intention, I think it might be better to try to get some of this on the table now. And I would concur with Commissioner Siegel that from our previous discussion that the changes to height that were shown in massing, while we appreciate the modifications, I don't think they achieved what folks were after from our last discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwal. Ms. Freshman.
Yes, building on the two previous speakers, I had raised the issue before of the skyline and pointed out that in Met Park, we started with two very square towers, and the design team there was very responsive to our interest in mitigating the additional height. And I think in this case, we've got three very large buildings. I understand there's some sculpting, but if you look at the sculpting, it's primarily at the pedestrian level. And what we were looking for is a much more interesting and varied skyline. I know that the Helix, because of its height, which is even higher than those buildings, although I understand there's some FAA issues with that. Still, that isn't enough to mitigate three very, very large essential boxes in terms of the appearance for these large buildings. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. Krista?
Thank you. I want to pick up on what Jane said, and to some extent, Judy. It baffles me, it frustrates me that from the first meeting until now, it seems that somehow we are talking past each other, community and applicant, in terms of what to concerns are. Or I'll be blunt and say that I more and more get the impression that the applicant is not particularly interested in addressing what I think were rather clearly have been conveyed as the concerns. I mean, to my mind, it's fine that it addresses a different issue to have more building separation. That's positive in itself. Perhaps, and there I sense Mr. Schroll and others have more of an understanding in that the idea of creating some difference or some new twist, literally thinking outside the box, so to speak, by having those solar panels, if it becomes clear that they work. But to me, that is almost like I would call sort of frantically or looking for gimmicks to sort of create differences, which are not the differences that we have been talking about. That sort of starts with the homogeneous height and then the lack of distinguishing features at the top. And from what I keep reading, that there is always the emphasis on the pedestrian perspective. And to my mind, almost I would call insulting this notion that, oh, but we have 7 buildings. And yes, the height of the 3 towers is the same. Oh, but they're very different, of course, from the height of the pavilions. Totally irrelevant, of course. So I mean, either we get somewhere with the basic issues that have been expressed, or we just sort of are fiddling with the margins or claiming that something is being done that I don't think it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Steve Stockwell.
Thanks. I wanted to just address the sort of rooftop improvements. I do think they're improvements. I think they're very interesting design elements that the applicants made. However, I think that there's sort of a fundamental problem with the overall design, and that is that the Helix building is supposed to be unique, and it is, but it basically stands or threatens to overwhelm the 3 somewhat homogeneous buildings, as the community has been pointing out. The 3 other buildings, the office buildings, don't look very green. The applicant has made quite an effort to emphasize the greenness of the project with the Helix building, but there seem to me a huge number of opportunities for green, either planting or even trees on those 3 office buildings. And that too would add design details. And as we go through the site plan process, I really would like to see more detail about how you intend to make those buildings, again, something of a complement to the Helix with all of its greenery. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Ben Devanzo.
Thanks. I agree a lot with the comments. I think Jane started off very well. It's kind of funny. I mean, I think the 2 things that we've talked, I think you are all saying you're addressing, 1 being the spacing, and 2 being the architectural detail at the top. Like, so it seemed like potentially good additions. Funnily enough, I'm pretty sure during the Met Park discussion, I was asking for more architectural details at the top. So it's kind of funny to see them end up here. But I totally agree that I'm not seeing anything here on sculpting, and hoping that the answer is that it's kind of still being thought through and decided. I know we had offered some feedback and desire to see sculpting so that, there's some more masking towards the north side than the south side, and creating a little bit more spacing along 12th Street. I echo Judy's comparison to Met Park, where you do have that. It is a bunch of rectangles, but it at least is kind of tearing up. And these don't do that, and would really like to see that. But I do, more pedestrian space isn't a bad thing. Making more interesting architectural features at the top isn't a bad thing. It's just not, I don't think, primarily what we were focused on.
Thank you, Ben. Commissioner Siegel, just unraise your hand if you're done. so I don't keep thinking that you want to
Forgive
speak.
me, I do that all the
Thank
time.
you.
Here, here's my apology.
Thanks, Jane. Arthur.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I want to join the chorus. We've used the word massive in the past, perhaps inappropriately from an architectural standpoint, but I think the community has been talking about the massive facades that are just boring as all get out, and they just look like boxes. And we've not seen also, and I think we will need to, and hopefully the Amazon will at the SPRC process show us these boxes, these glass boxes from every vantage point, not just heretofore. We've seen it mostly a north-south view through the open space, looking at the three buildings that are visible from the interior of this process. And we need to see and critique not just the huge, boring vertical facades of these buildings that I don't think the idea of cutting them in half as they are proposing to do makes it, for me, in terms of variety and sculpting and texture or whatever, to make the buildings visible. Now, from the bottom, pedestrians are pleased to have an attractive podium. From the top, I think what they're proposing is an improvement, but we're talking about the middle, the box, and bringing more sculpting and texture, not just to the interior of this PenPlace project, but all the way around the exterior as well. All of the different facades we would like to see to be far more interesting. And I'm sure that Amazon's architects can do a better job than they have so far. Thank you.
Thanks, Arthur. Darren?
I was going to stay in my transportation lane, but Krister's comments inspired me to chime in, because he did note something that I has really rankled me about this whole site plan from the beginning, which is the tremendous waste of space associated with the low density buildings, and then this sort of uniformity of 22-story stormtroopers around the perimeter. It just seems that it really does seem that things have not been heard, contrary to repeated assertions of the presentation. That particular point about the variety of heights was raised previously, and it just seems like it's not going to change, and that's a shame. I had hoped this site would be an extension of a city, and it's not. This very much still screams corporate campus, and that uniform 22-foot story wall with single-story space filler retail really kind of reinforces that. It's tremendously disappointing. So we'll return to some of the site layout issues later, I suppose.
We will. Thank you, Darren. Okay, so before we hear from the applicant on this issue, and after we hear from Elizabeth Morton, after we hear from LRPC, I do want to hear from staff on this issue, if they have any concerns with the changes that have been proposed, how they feel about the design that's been shared, and what steps would have to be taken before this could be considered for SPRC. So we'll hear from Elizabeth Morton, and then Sarah Steinberger, and then staff. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Chair Gearan. I just quickly wanted to address the retail pavilions, which I really like as one story. My hope is, as Commissioner Gearan was pressing last time, that these might provide opportunities for smaller scale retail, independent merchants, etc. And I do like that one story scale, and I do think it contributes to some variety. I liked Mr. Sockwell's comment about greenery on the facade, so I'm just going to chime in and associate myself with that aspect of his comment as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Sarah?
Thank you. Really,
I was so impressed by the comments we were hearing in this go around. I really just wanted to align myself with a few things that I heard. I do think it's important to note that the angles we're seeing for the overall view and what we're seeing, they do seem limited. And I think we really do, as one of the previous speakers indicated, we need to see more of the views from around the site to have a better sense of sort of what this is going to look like, because we keep seeing the helix sort of surrounding by, the glass boxes as they've been referred to, but really what the alternative views are going to look like is you're really not even going to see the helix. And I think it's important to kind of understand that when we're talking about what changes we're looking at with the massing and the actual sculpting of the buildings themselves, that's really to have the interplay, I think, between what the helix looks like and what these other buildings are going to look like, because certainly from many angles, not the ones we're seeing a lot of visuals of, but from many angles, you won't even necessarily really see the helix. So I think that's something that it needs to sort of be reassessed. I do think that what we've seen in terms of changes to the roof line and some of the screening that's going on, I think that's interesting. I don't think that it resolves the entire kind of content and what the feedback that's overall been presented from the community at this and the prior meetings. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'd love to hear from staff now if they have any outstanding concerns with the massing and or the changes that were made to the skyline. Yeah, hi, Matt.
Howdy. First of all, I just wanted to thank everybody for the comments. They really, I think, resonate with the applicant team and also staff in terms of the documentation of, the progression of this process. I do think that the level of discussions, the extent of details, the renderings, the different views that I think are needed at this point to continue the conversation, they really do resemble something we typically don't look at an LRPC venue. From staff side, we kind of have a separate and parallel process in terms of reviewing this from many different angles, not just building and architecture, but transportation, open space, sustainability, and other topics. And our practice, while mainly administrative at that point, really deals with a certain level of detail and information being provided at the start of SPRC. So in some respects, depending on the topic, we have not really seen some of that information because we are still kind of having this broader high-level discussion of, can we consider something that we have not envisioned 8 years ago, the last time this site was really closely looked at, and the long process that effort took to arrive at something, which, as I learned recently, not many people really look favorably on. So it really serves as an interesting opportunity to revisit that, utilize this very unique chance to consider it more holistically now that the hotel corner portion of the block is now part of the discussion. But at the same time, take a look at the context that we're planning within, because much of that surrounding area has changed. Development has arrived that wasn't there back in 2013, 2014, and have that inform how we consider heights, for example, heights within a block, heights within the larger Pentagon City area, and how do we feel? Can we consider something different than what we envisioned or anticipated before? And I think the venue that we're at, and I know we keep coming back to, is this LRPC or SPRC? But right now we're kind of continuing to return back to, can we consider something different? And it seems like from much of the comments, many of the stakeholders have already suggested that, yes, we could consider something different. I just don't quite appreciate or support what I'm seeing yet. So the fact that we are considering other options lets me believe that an SPRC-like discussion can help us get there, not just from seeing the additional information, but also seeing further adaptation of the proposal by the applicant. So I feel like both staff and the applicant are waiting for that next venue to open up so we can see the further evolution of these plans. And I think you've seen a sampling of that, as minor as some of you, I think, are identifying it. These were subtle adjustments given the scale of the entire block and the office towers, but nonetheless, it is a progression and reaction to what we've heard. And staff anticipates that further progression would be needed and is expected if we were to proceed to SPRC and really kind of get into the meat of the matter, be able to kind of digest the architecture of the towers, further adjustments to height and massing, and really continue to hear from the applicant if there are challenges to having what may seem like a logical response. Let's have that educational piece so we can all understand what the challenges might be and why certain things continue to be depicted a certain way.
Understood. I think that's helpful to hear. I guess what I'd like to know is, what would you expect to see before we would have an SPRC process, given that we have identified some pretty specific issues?
Right, and I think what we've heard from the applicant so far is a number of different commitments where some changes have already been considered. I know right now in the discussion element of tonight's meeting, we focused on the building massing and heights. There were, I think, some other considerable changes to the site layout and perimeter issues.
Yeah, we haven't even discussed those yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Which do continue to have a lot left over there. We are just kind of getting into, the meat of those issues. But to me, I think there's a element of kind of a faith element, if you will, in terms of we need to see some changes now, as we have during the presentation this evening. We need to see some options moving forward that engagements like the Park Master Planning effort could present for further community weigh-in. And I think it will be healthy to understand from the applicant what else is being studied in terms of further analysis and responses to what we've heard. Because I do know from other conversations we've had that a lot of things are being still studied further. They have not concluded. They are not at a point where certain commitments may be made, and further feedback, I think, is needed from the community on what those studies, I think, arrive at or discover. And I think we need to have the right venue for those conversations to take place and to really daylight what those analyses are kind of highlighting for the applicant.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So now I want to kind of sum up a little bit of what we heard, and I'd like to hear from the applicant. I see some of you have your hands back up, and we will get to that in just a minute. But so the issues that I'm hearing are, there's some acknowledgement that there were changes to the spacing at the bottom of the building and to articulating the skyline a little bit at the top by exposing some of the mechanical systems and putting the solar panels up there. But that isn't what was meant by sculpting. And we have had this discussion before, that perhaps we're not using the same language. However, we've had, I don't know, 8 folks, and this is a group of citizens who've seen a lot of development in their areas, so they're fairly familiar with these processes. So we're hearing that this doesn't really look like sculpting, and that's not just an issue in the project as it's going forward, but there's a sense that how receptive is the applicant to making changes based on what they're hearing from the community. So we'll go to the applicant in just a minute. I see 3 of my colleagues have their hands up, so we'll go to Judy, Jane, Daniel, and then the applicant.
Yeah, just following up on what Matt was saying, it feels like there's a lot, we haven't even gotten to circulation, but it feels like there are a lot of overarching issues of concern. And each time we have a session, a few little changes are made. And I'm just having a hard time understanding at which point we are ready to go to SPRC. And this is, I'm assuming that the SPRC will cover all of the buildings as opposed to one at a time, which is usually the way we approach most PDSPs. Question?
That's a good question.
Hi, this is Peter. The only reason that that's the case is in most PDSPs, the buildings are built one at a time. And sometimes by different developers, built over a long period of time. In this case, this is no different from past site plans that have happened where a developer is proposing multiple buildings to be entitled at the same time. In fact, that was the way that how much of Crystal City was developed, how much large areas of Ballston were developed, site plans with multiple buildings. So we just haven't seen a multiple building site plan, in quite some time.
Thanks, Peter. Jane, then Daniel.
Yeah, just a quick question, I guess, is for Matt to clarify, Matt Matusek, to clarify what he said. SP, in my mind, maybe I'm wrong about this, and I'd like to be wrong, it would preclude looking beyond the site. What? So you had said we want to reconsider the heights, given the what's been built and the update, where site height is, we have coverage formula in which in the update, which everybody will be seeing eventually, which doesn't apply here. So we're dealing with the design guidelines for PenPlace. The reason I would push back on going right to an SPRC is considering that broader context. I've never experienced an SPRC where we actually do that. Once we get to the SPRC, we're not looking at that broader context. That's my concern about going right to an SPRC, although I'd like to the process forward.
I'll take a stab at it. You were kind of coming in and out, so I'm not sure if I caught the entire question, but if the question relates to at what point and for how long the review process that we find ourselves now would allow an opportunity to not just consider and compare this proposal to the historical PDSP in Pentagon City and the 2014 design guidelines for PenPlace, but also the ongoing Pentagon City planning study, that is certainly not something that the door closes on simply because we've entered into SPRC. It will continue to kind of resurface itself, especially given the timing of the draft plan for that study, its timing, release, and I think modifications that are expected into the fall. I do think that from what we've seen so far, the guidance that we have for many of the sites within the study area that speak to a percentage of space on any given site that is able to develop versus those which need to be set aside for public space. This proposal is certainly exceeding that, particularly given the open space that's central to the block. So from that perspective, they're certainly meeting that standard as well as the guiding principles. I know we have some further discussions ahead of us on the connectivity element, which I think has a lot more layers to it, and that requires further meetings on that topic. I would also say that simply because I think we're getting into the SPRC, a lot of those discussions are going to carry over. Staff's review, for example, is not so much tied to any particular venue. We're going to continue to provide comments, wait for the responses, and continue to go through that analysis until the feedback has been collected and we feel comfortable with what we're seeing. So that's going to continue to evolve, through the rest of the year, and it's not really, I think, tied to a specific venue, with the exception of certain items typically are required by the time SPRC begins. So there will become a time on certain topics, not all of them, where we do need to get to that threshold for us to see some more information and be able to weigh in on our opinions and our findings.
Could you just send us all a little list of what those set pieces are? And the other question, or the question that was embedded and you did answer, was would we be able to get a height modification in an SPRC context? Or once moving to SPRC, are we done with height? And we've got 3 22-story buildings, period. That's a concern.
And I'm going to apply, I think, the last piece you mentioned to really everything that we're seeing. Nothing concludes simply because LRPC has transitioned to SPRC. The last 3 meetings, even the kickoff that happened in March, I believe, really were initial opportunities to provide feedback. They've informed what staff's evaluation is. They've informed what the applicant's responses and further ideas and studies might be. So all of that is a continuing process that's going to continue well into the fall. And simply because we're changing the venue does not preclude height from being discussed. If anything, very similarly to, I think, how we concluded the last LRPC meeting in June, I believe, or it was actually May. There was a certain set of expectations that if and when we show up to the next venue, we anticipate X, Y, and Z. Now, I think it's important to highlight that these are topics and issues we need to highlight, and the response needs to be a combination of potential adjustments or key explanations of this is why we, for whatever reason, are not able to give you what you think you would want to see. Whether that's programming necessities or the site challenges that we may not be aware of or haven't seen yet. So I'll leave that to the applicant to explain, but I think we do need to be clear on what is still unresolved.
Thank you. Let's finish up the comments so that we can hear from Taylor in just a moment. So next we have Daniel, then Jim Lantelmi, and then Taylor.
Good evening, everyone. I really like what I've seen, and I am a little bit perplexed at some of the comments that I'm hearing, because I think that what I'm seeing is a large land bay that has for 30 years been identified as the locus of the highest density planned and envisioned for the greater Pentagon City area, that's being developed by a single applicant that's going to be taking up the entire land bay for a single unified purpose, a two-suit purpose at that. And so I think that to the extent that it looks and feels like a campus, it's we're not talking about the 2000 block of Richmond Boulevard here. We're not talking about the Met Park block. We're talking about a block that both is intended to have this kind of density and is intended to have this kind of density in part because of how at the perimeter it is. So I'm not at all bothered by the extent to which there is a campus-like feel for most of this project. I'm also not at all bothered by the architecture and the massing. I actually quite like the architecture. I think that to the extent that people are, I think, rightly interested in seeing a greater diversity of architectural styles in this area, I think that it's important to think about the fact that these are 4 buildings that are going to be surrounded by other buildings that are going to have very different architectural styles. The old government buildings just to the west are going to be redeveloped in the near future. The buildings to the south have sort of this almost Jeffersonian kind of architecture to them. We're going to get very different architecture in all directions, and we are going to have a diversity of look and feel in terms of the building. In terms of the idea that the massing is too much, I think we've seen great progress from the applicant tonight, and I also want to point out that we've got a presentation that creates a lot of space, not just on a 2D plane, but by having a quarter of the buildings be shaped like a cone. Basically, there's a whole lot of cubic space that's being freed up and dedicated to being open and to sun coming through and being airy and creating an open area. So I think that there are still improvements to be made. I think that 12th Street has to be more activated than where we're seeing. But I 100% think that that's an SPRC problem. That's not an LRPC problem. That's something that we talk about when we get to the next stage. So as far as the LRPC is concerned, I had one really big concern about considering some of the transportation related changes, and we'll be talking about that momentarily. But as far as massing and architecture is concerned, I think it shows an extreme amount of promise, and I'm really excited to move on to SPRC. And from my perspective, I think we can do that as quickly as possible. So thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Jim Lantelmi.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I guess I have a couple of clarifying questions too that all of us could use. First off, what is in fact the FAA height limit here? I want to make sure that we are talking about that that there is a maximum that we can't go beyond, and that's fine. Second, I think that Commissioner Weir is right about density. For literally decades, there's been a certain amount of density that has been allocated to this entire block here, which we need to use all of that density. We should not be leaving even 1 square foot on the table. We need to be developing this, and we're fortunate to have one developer doing it all at once to its maximum. Now, there's a difference between massing and height, as far as I'm concerned. Massing that that completely uses up all the density on this site is good, and we should be encouraging it. As far as the height goes, if there's ways we can look at the height differently to squish one down, push another up, make one a little bit broader. We have more than just the 3 towers. We have those smaller buildings too. Are there alternatives there that can be done to spread some of this density around within the block? I'm certainly open to that, but ultimately, if it comes down to we're going to have a bunch of big buildings here, yeah, we're going to have a bunch of big buildings here. We have been expecting to have big buildings here for 40 years now. That is what goes in this area here. How we allocate that density within that block, I think it's absolutely appropriate for us to discuss it, and we can have. I would love to see different options for the heights. The variation would probably be good, but that's something that is different than massing, and I think the massing and density. We need to have the density here. So, the changes that have been made so far are great, but I think they don't address the height issues. I'd like to see more of a discussion on that, or see whether there's further options on that. But other than that, yeah, this has to be developed. This has to be ultimately full density here. We need to take full advantage of this site. We're a small county. We don't have a lot of land left. This is where it goes. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, Taylor.
Sure. Thanks, Elizabeth. So I'm Taylor Lodge with JBG Smith, for those of you I haven't met yet. I think we're hearing loud and clear in this meeting that there are really before we get into site circulation, 2 very clear questions around architecture. And the first is, this group would like to better understand studies around height diversity. And so I think I'd sort of like to be clear that the tower top ideas that were shown today are just that. They're ideas. It's sharing a concept, and it's something that this team fully expects to refine in SPRCs. And I think that based on what we're hearing around this question of achieving greater diversity of height, I think what I'm hearing is that this team does need to study for those SPRCs answers to that question. I think one of the things that this team likes about trying to maximize the height of those towers is that it does preserve more area at grade for open space. But I think given that this question's been asked of this group, it's worth in that SPRC us coming and showing some work on what those trade-offs might look like. And so I think that is something we're hearing loud and clear deserves some more study. And I think the second question that we heard very clearly from almost everyone is a desire to understand more about what's happening at the middle of the building. So we've really covered the base and what's happening at that pedestrian level. We've talked a lot about the tops of the buildings, and I think there's more to come there. But questions around the middle, and not just the middle of a few select views, but every single angle of all the towers. And the reason that we haven't really taken that dive into every single angle of those towers is because that's something that we typically are used to presenting at an SPRC level. And that's something that we are preparing materials to really showcase each side of the building, talk about colors, material, texture, and how those compare and contrast across towers and facades to try to give a very complete picture of what's happening on those buildings' architecture, so that we can get complete feedback, comments, and likes and dislikes, and so that can kind of continue to fuel further study on the architecture of those buildings. But I think that we have a real leg up on that topic because of what we're hearing in this group, and that as we're continuing to study those facades and think through different ways to treat those facades, diversity seems to be a real goal of this group, and that's something that I expect that you all would see hopefully proven out at an SPRC level. So I did want to make sure that those were two things that we are hearing very loud and clear, and working on ways to continue studying and continue to showing our work at the SPRC level. And John or Dale, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add or sort of any detail you wanted to get in on what this group might be seeing in terms of studies or further detail on some of these design decisions.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor. I think you summed it up really well. In fact, you hit the high points that I was outlining as well in terms of height and sculpting and the emphasis on it. It's thank you to all of you. It's been very helpful, I think, to get a kind of a clarity around the language as Jane started out with, I think, so make sure we're speaking the same language. And it's clear, I think, that there's pretty strong support for some of the development at the tops of the buildings, but clear also that there's concern about the bulkiness of the middle, as I heard. So as Taylor said, we're excited to continue to develop and focus on that as we move forward and share, I think, what's going to be received as, you know, some improvements there in the articulation of that part of the project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Alberta. Thank you, Taylor. Definitely, if and when this goes forward to SPRC, you're absolutely right. What people want to see is more sculpting, and we might not be using the term the same way, but we are referring to the bulkiness of the buildings, not necessarily the additional space at the base or the variation at the top, a more diverse skyline with height variation, some more greater discussion about why we can't make the pavilions a little bit taller in order to reduce the height on the other buildings, and different ways to treat the facades. I want to move on to the next two areas, site circulation and perimeter circulation, because we're already at 8:30 and we had planned to end this meeting at 9. If we didn't get to your points, we will have a little bit of time at the end, or you can raise them when it's your turn to speak. So site circulation, Pam.
Yay! Hi. I'll try to be really fast because it's running late. I did want to say before I talked about site circulation that I agree with most of the comments about the bulkiness of the buildings, and I'm glad that we will be making progress on that. I want to comment on the revised east-west line through the site, and also on the new north. I don't know where that noise is coming from. New north exit onto Army Navy Drive. I am I'm glad to hear that the east-west line has been modified a bit. It doesn't really match a desire line yet, but it's getting closer. I am disappointed that in creating this new line, that the land is broken up even more. And my suggestion had been just to rotate the line so you wouldn't disturb the land so much. And I'd like to see some further think about that design. I also wanted to comment that there was reference to the community's feedback on both Teardrop Park and Met Park and how people like meandering paths. And that is true for those sites. This is a different site. It's a huge mega block. It originally was supposed to have streets and sidewalks. And without the streets and sidewalks within the site, there has to be ways of accommodating all the transportation needs that would normally be on this huge mega block. And that includes creating a desire lines that actually match desire lines. So that's it on that. On the stairway going down, I want to know more about that. I don't need the answer now. But among other things, where does it leave the site? And where does it come down on Army Navy Drive in relationship to the parking garage and the entrance to that? And those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pam. We'll go through all of the comments and then we'll ask for applicant responses. Jane, then Krister, then Elizabeth Morton. Jane Siegel?
I just have one quick question. The sidewalk on 12th Street will be very, very important because that's the transit way, and pedestrians and the metro go together like peanut butter and jelly. I'm quoting the consultant for the update. Will that, I think I heard 15 feet. Do we have that information now? Maybe this is a Matt question or it could be a applicant question. I am very concerned about that. Just one more, I've been down 12th Street. It is really turning into a lovely, walkable, urban street, and I hope we can build on it and preserve it. So how wide will the sidewalk be? Hopefully 15 feet? That's the question.
Okay, thank you. Christer, then Elizabeth Morton.
Thank you. I had initially hoped to be able to get my comment fitted in under the previous heading, but now I realize that it really applies perhaps in terms of process and what we might have happen here with the structure of the agenda also under this heading. Having listened to the very helpful comments from Daniel and Jim Lattelme and being reminded by what Matt was saying, I think it has been a disadvantage for us that in each meeting we have sort of been diving straight into buildings and architecture. And now I think we begin to hear that there's a risk that we might, again, under this heading, get into the real details with where does this path go and is this the kind of an entrance and exit situation that works for everyone and so on. I think the problem is that we have simply not, particularly in an LRPC setting, focused enough on what is it that we want to get out of this site, as Jim Lattelme put it, and leaving aside density and height, which I don't want to reduce. That was not the issue under that heading. Here, the question is rather, are you primarily focusing on, which I sense is the applicant's interest in creating a park where we hear about ideas that come forward while we are carrying on this process and before we have gotten into any notion of park planning? Or is it sort of like this biker standing there mid-block on each saying, who are these idiots who come up with the idea of putting a park with a lot of people milling around and winding paths when I'm adamant that I want to cross this block on the straightest, fastest path from east to west. And at the same time, the family with small kids who thought that this was the place where they could let them loose, or the older, not so agile folks who thought that this was the respite where they wouldn't have to watch out for the scooter or fast biker. And I think, I mean, I sense or know that there are probably different views in that weighing, but I don't think we have ever really, before we now dive into where the path should be aligned, gotten into talking about what is it that we want and can and should get out of this parcel, apart from the buildings, which I assume we will get back to in all their aspects of density and height and massing.
Thank you, Christer. Yes, at the end of this discussion, we will ask for staff input on this as well. We have raised this issue with them, and I think they share the same question. Thank you. Elizabeth Morton, then Rosemary.
Thank you, Chair Gearan. Picking up on something I believe Mr. Ahl was talking about, I don't necessarily think the goal of these paths are necessarily to be the straight and efficient. I know we're replacing a street and we want to make sure we're approximating some of the public nature and benefits of the street. But it's really well documented that people will walk further and walk more if there's something interesting to look at. If you think about how you walk for an hour in New York City or an urban environment, something with interesting to see, as opposed to what a drag it is to walk around blocks like, Crystal City today, for example. So I don't necessarily think these curves are going to dissuade people. People will be looking at the retail pavilions, the water features, looking at the helix. I used to live in the city in Oakland, where I would go out of my way to walk along Lake Merritt, because not only there was natural beauty, but there were people doing Tai Chi exercises there. So I don't really think that efficiency necessarily, given the opportunity for a multi-use space that we don't have elsewhere, has to be the driving force. I do think that, especially at the SPRC and park planning level, we want to make sure there are not perceived and real access barriers, and everyone does feel welcome. I don't think it's a matter of the meandering paths. I think it's things like, how do you enter the site? Are there benches at the entrance to the site? Is there signage and programming? So having said that, although I actually concur with a lot of what Commissioner Weir said in the previous section, I hope this isn't viewed exclusively as a campus. I have heard it referred to as a campus in the press, so it'd be great to get some language clarification on what we're calling it. But we do want to make it an inclusive environment, but I don't feel like the answer to this, especially given the opportunity we have here, is stressing efficiency and straightness. So thanks very much. That's my comment.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Rosemary, then Darren.
Hello, and thank you for allowing me to make my comment. We had stressed in the pre-meetings, before we even got to this point, I did, about dismay about the staircase. And we talked, it's a nice segue, because we were talking about equity of moving past this, through the space. The staircase is the definition of inequitable space. Stairs are a choice, and we can just as easily choose to have one celebrated path for everybody. But as soon as we start celebrating stairs, we have moved in a different direction of equitable use of space. And I really want a deeper conversation about this. And so I appreciate having this moment to put the a pin in it.
Thank you, Rosemary. Darren, and then Steve Sockwell.
I want to preface by saying I took the occasion to clear my remarks with the remainder of Transportation Commission. And so these do represent a sort of an informal polling of a majority of Transportation Commission. The site circulation fails as a transportation facility. I appreciate Commissioner Morton's comments about sort of meandering recreational space, but this is a 650-foot expanse to traverse. If it is not a public, clear, straight path where I can stand at one end and see where I am going at the other, then it fails as a transportation facility. If it doesn't welcome a variety of modes, it fails as a transportation facility. That has implications. We can certainly, it seems like it's a fait accompli that this is going to be a park and not a transportation facility, and that's fine, but that will have, we then have transportation needs that we need to fulfill otherwise in other ways on the site, and we'll go into those later. And I didn't catch all of Ms. Ciotti's remarks because my signal is breaking up, but it seems like it was a concern about the Army-Navy frontage and the staircase, and my comment about a straight linear right-of-way applies there doubly. Thank you.
Her concern is that it's not universal design. Those stairs are not accessible to everyone. Thank you, Darren. Steve Stockwell?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a simple question for the applicant. What are your plans for public access to the helix? I ask that because I think it may have an impact on the pedestrian circulation patterns.
Okay, we'll get that addressed at the end. Ben, you had your hand up earlier. Did you have, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having trouble. The hand raise function.
I made a note that it was up and then Jim Lynch told me. Go ahead.
Yep. Sorry, yeah, I'm trying to, just doesn't, I'm sorry, sorry on video. I want to speak to the staircase because I think connection across Army Navy Drive is really important. And there's only, the original plan only had that one ramp up to the kind of helix and indirect route. I and certainly others in the neighborhood are very interested in the long-term vision for Pentagon City, including development on what is now the parking lots for the Pentagon, and the draft PDSP plan includes that vision. And so having a pretty impermeable wall along Army Navy Drive doesn't really reflect, therefore, a connected neighborhood in the, like, this is, you know, we all realistically, it's not going to happen in the longer term, but, you know, this is going to last decades, hopefully. And so I think universal design is so important, and really encourage the applicant to think like the stairs is a step and a gesture in that direction, although I'd rather they be to the west of the entrance. That's more, I think, more of an SPRC issue, but I'd really encourage the applicant to think through how it can open up that Army Navy Drive side more than we are now. There's progress, but in a way that's accessible to everyone, to parents, to multimodal users, to people who are using accessibility devices, and to having that potential future vision where there's a development across the street, you know, 30, 40 years from now. And I'd also encourage and like to see at some point a match between, in terms of the circulation and the pathways and stuff like that. This is supposed to be part of the green ribbon. The draft PDSP plan has some components now of what that looks like. I don't think it entirely matches 100%, so would like to see kind of a detailing about how those two line up from the applicant.
Thank you. Jim Lantelmi, and then we will pose our questions to staff of the applicant.
Yeah, fortunately, Mr. Devanzo has raised all the points I was going to raise about the Army Navy Drive, so I don't have to go through those again. Thank you, Ben. For the pathway through, I think it's definitely an improvement, the east-west pathway. That will be part of the green ribbon that we're proposing out of the PDSP process. And that green ribbon does tend to contemplate, meandering is probably not the right word. We're looking at something that is not rule or straight, but as Darren Buck said, it will be something that you can see from one end to the other so you know where you're going. It's not supposed to be a ramble in the park. It is to be a corridor, a biophilic corridor that you know where you're going to, and will have interest along it, a biophilic interest all along it. I think that this is beginning to evolve in that direction for this site. I'd like to see it move more in that direction. I was very concerned about prior to this meeting, the original proposal just wasn't meeting that at all. I also know that the number saying that who's going to be using which entrance to the site really misses the point, because the east site and the west sites across from this site will be redeveloping, and people will be coming through there that simply don't exist right now. So those entrances do need to be paid attention to as being primary pathways, not just to the site, but through the site as the east and the west redevelop, and this becomes a true corridor. I would like to have information, by the way, going back to the Army Navy Drive, more information from the applicant as to how that whole side is going to look and why it needs to be a wall. Why? Because stairs just generally don't work. We're getting rid of those at Crystal City, those mid-block stairways, and to add one here seems to be contrary to the direction that we're going. why do we have this topographic difference between the site and Army Navy Drive, and there's some other way around this? That's for a future meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, so what we've heard on this part of the discussion is recognition that the new path breaks up the land more. A lot of dismay about the staircase from a few folks that is there a way around this? This is not part of how we design universal design, so everyone has equal access to the site. There's a way to address the topography to that. A sense that perhaps the site circulation fails as transportation, and a desire to get clearer information about the match ribbon. Some of the questions that we had, and perhaps staff or the applicant can answer those now, are, and I don't know if this is a little premature, about where the stairway is on Army Navy, where we would see that. The width of the sidewalk on 12th Street, Commissioner Siegel, Jane raised a good point. That's going to be a very busy sidewalk. How we plan to balance the bike and pedestrian circulation through the site. We've heard that there were not plans to allow bike access through the site, but if we remember from our prior LRPC meetings, there's concern about that if there's not a protected bike lane on 12th Street, just on the other 3 parts of the site. Will there be public access to the helix? Does staff want to go first on those questions?
Yes.
Thanks, Joanne.
Elizabeth. I'm going to start again. My name is Joanne Gabor with DES. Staff does share the majority of those concerns that the community has raised. As was mentioned, we do have concern with the removal of the roads. The lack of the east-west, north-south connection has been removed. And the roads, just by their nature, do provide a more direct pathway, which does have that visibility from each end to connect the site. And the park area does have more green area, which is definitely a positive, but we still would like to see those elements of a more direct pathway provided through the site. It is a large site. It is something we are still very concerned about. And we are also concerned about the fact that bikes most likely will be used through the site. And as the applicant mentioned early on, I say bikes, but I mean bikes, scooters, the one wheels, any sort of micromobility device that exists or will exist soon in the future. We believe these will be through the site. We want to make sure that the site is safe for all users and that we don't have any issues with the different modes of travel going through that site. And we think that does need to be accommodated. And this is just the interior circulation, correct?
At this point, yes.
Okay. I think the other, and just to provide a little foreshadowing, with the removal of the streets interior to the site, that is even more why the perimeter circulation is important to us, that we can discuss in a moment.
Okay, thank you. How about the sidewalk width on 12?
I don't know what the sidewalk width is. My hope is the applicant can share that. I know we do expect a lot of pedestrians on all 4 sides, and so we do want to have adequate sidewalk widths on all 4 of the streets.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. Taylor, do you want to answer some of the other questions?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. What I will do is try to MC this and ask John and Dale to join me in answering some of these questions. And Elizabeth, if I've got a running list on my screen here, but please let me know if we're missing any of these. So I think first one, easy one, John or Dale, do you mind answering what the currently proposed clear width is on 12th?
I confess I'm hoping Dale knows the answer to that because I don't off the top of my head.
It's 10 feet.
Thank you, Pam.
It's on the revised 4.1. That's why I raised my hand. It's 10 feet all the way around the site, which is great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Dale or someone on the MBBJ team, maybe while we're going through the rest of these, if you could just confirm that. And Pam, your check is in the mail. You get architects billing rates for doing that work, so thank you. A couple questions here on the stair. Rosemary really good points on questions around universal design. And I think, and maybe it'd be helpful if we flashed the stair graphic up to sort of compare and contrast what we're looking at versus where we're heading. So Kim, if you're able to do that from the deck on page 32, this image that we're looking at here is very schematic in nature, and I think what we were hoping to communicate today is we've heard this desire for a more direct connection to Army Navy. I think as some folks have mentioned, there's the possibility that there is more development in the future across Army Navy Drive, and there should be some porosity to that. And so I think what we're looking to communicate here is where and generally how that might be possible. And there's a lot of thinking going on right now about how that gets designed to focus on sightlines, how the ramping system would work with that stair to ensure equity of access. And I think that is something that we're excited to share some more rendered images at the SPRC level so that folks can get an understanding of exactly how that would work.
And Taylor, I would just add that very consciously, Rosemary, we located the stair where we did and even angled it the way we did so that at the upper level, it starts where the ramp starts. It takes you down to Army Navy, and at the bottom, they come very close together with a little bit of space in between where some exiting occurs from the building. But wanted to be conscious of the fact that, well, it is, you've raised to us before the idea that ideally we want to have the one pathway for all. Sometimes, though, we do our best to address both kinds of ability and access. I did review this with our consultant. I've mentioned her name. I don't need to bring it up here, but we'll have further conversation with you and maybe bring Karen into that. But felt that this was a reasonable approach. So we do want to have further conversations with you about how we do the stair. The stair is something that was specifically requested, and we're doing our best to incorporate and still address the universal design.
John, who requested the stairs? Who said they wanted stairs?
So maybe I'll let staff answer that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify, we've always said we want to have an east-west, north-south connection. We've never specified that it has to be stairs specifically.
Okay, thanks, Joanne.
That's accurate. Yeah, Joanne, they didn't say stairs specifically, but we've had this elevated design for a while and trying to find a way to achieve it by having both a ramp and a stair.
Okay.
And then I think touching off of John's point about this elevation, I think there were some slides shared in previous meetings trying to articulate how there we go, perfect, the general intent of that elevation. And I'd love, John, or Dale, if you could sort of jump in and just do a refresher course on the intent of the elevation. I think that one of the questions that has come out of the fact that there is this elevation is, does that mean that there's a retaining wall condition on Army Navy Drive? And that is an area, again, where I think we've heard loud and clear the concern that there not be one. And there's been a lot of further design refinement on Army Navy Drive to maximize the amount of, urban, active, transparent storefront along that walk, and where there can't be storefront, a much more sloped, porous landscaping feature, and that's all renderings and design that are in process and planned to be shared at the SPRC. So I know we'll have continued refinement and thoughts around that topic, but that is one that we're really excited to get into because I think that those images should put some of the concerns about any wall condition hopefully to bed.
Okay,
yeah, and just to remind people of the reason.
It's 9 o'clock and we haven't even finished the third portion of this. I'm going to propose that we continue the discussion tonight and get through it, but I want to hear about the answer to the other question. And that was the issue about, would there be public access to the helix?
Yes, so quick answer there. the proposal is that 2 weekend days per month, the Helix would be open for public access, free of charge.
Okay, thank you. And
And
then,
of course, the employees also can bring their families and friends anytime when it's open.
okay, okay. All right, so now I want to just make sure that there's no one who's part of the LRPC who has a strong prohibition to continuing the meeting to say 9:30 to see if we can finish the third bullet on our agenda. Raise your hand, put on your camera if you can't do that. Okay, we have a few public speakers I'd also like to accommodate. All right, so let's go through the third bullet point, and that is the perimeter circulation and pickup and drop off. Let me know if you'd like to speak to that issue. Okay, I see Darren. Do you want to go first?
Thank you. As I mentioned, I consulted with some of my colleagues at Transportation Commission, so please know this doesn't solely reflect my opinion. My opinion actually jibes somewhat with a lot of what Ms. Gabor. I'm terribly concerned about a lot of.
Darren, excuse me. Do you want to turn your camera up and see if you have better connectivity? Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. As I mentioned, I've consulted with some of my Transportation Commission colleagues. So this doesn't necessarily reflect my opinion being similar to Ms. Gore's. I have a lot of concerns about the conversion from surface streets and all that they do to this underground configuration. As I mentioned in the site circulation portion, I think the park is destined to fail as a public travel facility, even for non-motorized, without that clear line of sight, with the continued drawings of green ribbons and schematics that really seem to make it about a pedestrian-only experience, which is fine, which is appropriate for a park. Is not if we maintain the upper level as a park, as it seems like we're destined to. The first requirement that we'd like to see is protected bike lanes on 12th Street to provide east-west connectivity between the Metro and the East Street bike lanes. This is an existing trail adjacent to the vacant lot. This block used to be entirely car-free. Some of you may recall, where it simply had a trail going through with no road. This site plan completes the conversion of this block to somewhere where bicyclists are not welcome. The Army-Navy lanes are nice, but are an unacceptable substitute for a direct connection to and from East Street to the Metro station. Up and drop off is going to be needed to be handled underground, including tour buses, because most of that pickup and drop off would have otherwise occurred within the site on the new local streets and loading docks. This is going to require redesigning internal. We're going to need DoorDash, et cetera, to designate that as a pickup and drop off zone because it is far from intuitive. We need to talk. We direct those users to that underground facility and designating the majority of street parking that remains on Eads and Fern for meters rather than pick up and drop off. I want to address the Amazon only local shuttle. They say there are 3 shuttles that may be running. It seems to me those are going to replicate a lot of Metroway routes, which adds traffic. It undercuts our transit service, and it's a pickup drop off complication. I would suggest that Amazon could get a lot of community favor by funding Metroway operations to a service level that meets their standards and perhaps pay for fare cards for their employees to use. I'd like to see a true commitment to prohibiting cars from the Amazon campus because they are basically making public a cost at private gain. They are privatizing all the benefits of a car-free environment, but making the costs of those trips public by isolating them to the perimeter streets. I'd like to see a ground-up justification for all the parking spots proposed. And finally, abandoning those master transportation plan provisions about grid connectivity. This is a core central goal of the master transportation plan and a specific requirement for this site and this area. And it's mostly to benefit a private actor here. So we'd like to talk to DES if this does go through about other instances and how we're going to deal with unwinding the grid. Are we going to, or Pentagon Center, Costco, to provide interstitial streets on Fern Street south of 23rd? It's a local yield street that has over 6,000 cars per day now. The community has long asked DES for traffic diversion measures that have been refused because of grid connectivity. We have 2 recent site plans. There were hot button issues around grid connectivity, 101 12th Street, 1900 Crystal. We have right next door, 11th Street, the Paperclip Eads Park has an 11th Street that goes through it. Why does the public park have a street that goes through it, but this one does not? And finally, the bike of the master transportation plan, it has a system of bike boulevards. State of the practice in bike designs is diversion measures to control motor vehicle volume. That's not mentioned in our MTP. I'd like to see that amended to include that. So that in basic, and I can forward these notes to whoever wants them, that's sort of a consensus of some things that we would expect to see if this reversion from local streets to a park-only environment above ground goes through. We think it balances all of the different needs, accommodates all of the transportation uses, and basically doesn't put that cost upon the community for excluding automobile traffic from their site.
Okay, thanks, Darren. There was a little bit of connectivity issues, but I think we heard most of what you had to say. I appreciate the Transportation Commission gave this such a thoughtful review, and as it goes forward, I think it really behooves the applicant to have perhaps a separate meeting with TC to go over some of this. I'd like to hear, now not seeing any other raised hands on this issue, staff's response to these issues and their thinking about the revision to the transportation grid. Yeah, hi, Joanne.
Hello again. Darren, as you mentioned, I think I got most of those notes, but if you wouldn't mind sometime sending those over to Peter, myself, and the other staff, just so we can make sure we have them all identified. I want to make sure we catch everything. One thing that staff is concerned about that was mentioned by the applicant is they are completing a VISM analysis. We are very concerned about the arterial streets. As a lot of you know, through our planning processes, we have done a change in allocation of use for Army-Navy Drive and 12th Street, Army-Navy Drive. We are reducing travel lanes to include the 2-way cycle track. And with 12th Street, we are having the dedicated transit lanes. And this has reduced the capacity for private vehicles. And with the introduction of the Amazon and the 3 entrances and the signals at those intersections, we are concerned about the throughput and capacity. So there are concerns that we have that until we have the results of that analysis, we're not going to be able to finish that discussion or really continue that discussion. But we are concerned about having the modes accommodated, especially on Fern Street, having the protected bike lanes, the travel lanes, and the curb space, East Street and Army-Navy Drive. As has been mentioned, 12th Street, there are no plans for bike lanes at this time. That is going to be the main transit way. But it does reinforce our concern about having that east-west connection through the park and that north-south connection through the park. Because of, as we talked about with the internal site circulation, the removal of the streets does put the emphasis on the arterials, and we need to make sure those are designed correctly.
Thank you.
I guess
Did-
one.
Yeah,
If
go
you
ahead,
wouldn't
Joe.
mind, another thing I just wanted to mention to everyone and remind everyone. So the curb space through the site plan process, while we will talk about the proposed uses for it, if it's pick up and drop off, it's loading, shuttle spots, daycare, metered spaces, Arlington County does maintain the right to manage those spaces for the life of the site plan. So as needs come and go and change, we will change the designation of those spaces. But the main goal at this point is to make sure we have those spaces, sufficient space numbers to accommodate the uses that we see happening now and then in the future.
Thank you. Taylor, do you want to respond to this? Oh, Pam, do you want to go first? Pam, then Taylor.
Oops.
You're muted.
There we go. Okay. Mute, unmute. Yeah, keeps going back and forth. I just wanted to say that I totally agree with everything that Darren said, and I wanted to really emphasize the importance of somehow figuring out how to have protected bike lanes on 12th Street. It's so important. And for me as a pedestrian, if we don't have protected bike lanes, the cyclists are going to be on the sidewalk, and it's going to be too crowded to have cyclists there too. So please figure this one out. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. And then Taylor, did you want to weigh in at all with the concerns and the questions about the changes to the street grid and the perimeter circulation?
Yeah, sure. And Darren, apologies in advance. I had a hard time hearing you, but I did see your notes, and that's something we'll go through and work on a more comprehensive response to. I guess I would invite either John or Grace maybe to talk a little bit about the thinking behind the treatment of the interior of the space. I think I heard somewhere in there, Darren, there was a concern that this park be privatized, and that is absolutely 100% not the intent here. I think the design thinking in general for this space is looking to find the proper balance in the broader neighborhood of how to find level 1 pathways for bikes and level 1 experiences for pedestrians. And so the thought in trying to separate those two uses and modes of transport was to try to find a level 1 solution for people of all modes of transport, and trying to solve that on site. So Grace, maybe share a little bit of your thinking around sort of the character of that public park.
Sure, happy to. So I think that at the kind of root and the core of our design concept is absolutely a public open space. And I do think it's intended to function much more as a park than anything else. So not necessarily a transit way and not also as a campus. We have prioritized a lot of these east-west connections more in alignment with some of the green ribbon concepts than we have even door-to-door circulation within the Amazon, to and from the Amazon buildings. So it's not like we're providing, the straight shots for the Amazonians and not for the public. I think that we are really being very equitable with a lot of our kind of design decisions and trying to balance a lot of needs and desires for this to be a public open space. In terms of character, we've heard just a ton about biophilia and shade. We're really excited to start working through and adding some additional elements into that. So we're going to be going into more depth on that with the SPRC and also the public open space. So more updates to come on that. And so I think that basically sums that up, unless there's any further questions specifically related.
Thanks, Grace. Darren, you have your hand.
Yes, I do. I'd like to push back on a couple of assertions there. You say that the intent is to provide a true public space. The design language does not convey that, and the iteration of this design convinces me that it's not going to get there. It does not resemble public space. It simply doesn't. Anything that curves around, where if I'm looking at one extent and looking to where I need to go, and I see a path that curves around a nice green, lush park, that design language tells me that's a park. This is not somewhere where necessarily I, as a member of the public, and someone used the word equitable, if I'm a visitor who's just gotten off the metro and I'm looking for where to go, that design language does not say to me, oh, this is how I get to the DoubleTree Hotel over on the other side of Eads. It simply doesn't. So it could be a public park. I have my doubts, but that's fine. But let's situate ourselves in the design language that's been presented, that it is not a public space travel facility, and it does not communicate that. And until we talk about what a design language for public space looks like, it's not going to get there. And our time is better served mitigating some of that and handling the transportation in other ways.
Darren, really good point, I think, on sightlines. And I think that's a comment that's been raised a few times. And you know, I think we've showed some sightline imagery in the past, but I think that with these revisions, we may benefit from bringing those renderings and imagery back to SPRC to try and show, you know, what those sightlines would look like, because I think that that's something that we'd love some input on. So thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, just a couple of things.
Okay, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make it brief, Elizabeth. A reminder too that we've, in addition to the idea of a park, one of the ways we're drawing people into and through the site is through retail. We've created quite a bit more retail space than was in the original PDSP, and including angled views from the corners of the site so that people readily see both retail and through the retail in straight lines into the center of the site. And there are a number of different ways, I think, which you may have seen in some of those earlier diagrams that we talked about in the past. People can angle through the site in ways even quicker than they could have done with a regular grid. Now, they aren't always in straight sight lines through the site, and your point's taken. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Christer, you had your hand up for a moment.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I think the last few comments have really emphasized that we are in a bit of, as I see it, a cart before the horse situation. What I hear is, if I'm a bit rude about it, a lot of speculation about what might become of this open space park slash pathways in different directions. And we have stated intentions by the applicants. And I'm sure there are hopes or expectations by the community and with more development coming around the site. But until we have gone through at least sort of the initial stages of some kind of planning process for the park, it's very difficult to gauge how intensively used it will be. And I'm talking about, you know, different demographics, people living and working just around here within walking distance. There was talk about tourist buses as the opposite extreme. And that with the helix, well, if people can walk around it, that's one thing, but open to weekends a month, if I got it right, and so on. I mean, who and for what purpose are we going to attract people to this space? And what is it that we have to balance with the ability to cut through the space? I think we are sort of spinning wheels, no pun intended here, before we know quite a bit more about what this open space as a park, as an attraction, will really amount to.
Thank you, Christer. Okay. I'm seeing a couple of hands up. Daniel and then Judy.
Thank you. So you know, the way I approach this as I look at this is in the LRPC stage is we've got a departure from our adopted plans and documents, and so what changes or what needs to be done in order to make that departure fall within the realm of consideration and in order to proceed to SPRC. And one of the points I made last time is that given the loss of the internal circulation, I would not see it being within the realm of consideration without PBLs encircling the site. I'm glad to see the progress made in that direction. I'd like to see a southbound PBL on Eads. I understand why the applicant might be hesitant to propose that they pay for that because it's on the other side of the street. I very much want to associate myself with Commissioner Buck's comments about the importance of sightlines. I don't know that that's exactly the phrasing that Darren used, but that was my own takeaway from it. I think that a lot of work can be done at the SPRC level to make sure that not only are sightlines right, but that other aspects of wayfinding are incorporated as well, right? So that a pedestrian trying to get to the DoubleTree has ways of telling them you can walk through this park. The conditions that we would want to see in place to make sure that the park is in fact a public space, those are very much SPRC things. I do want to see more done on 12th Street. I'm not satisfied with it as a shared lane for cyclists. I'm willing to say that I would be willing to entertain something other than a PBL. I do think it's up to the applicant to show us what that something is, but I would be satisfied to consider it at the SPRC stage rather than required as a something to see at the LRPC stage, and that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Judy.
Yeah, I just want to make an observation that links to many of the comments, and that is that I agree that the density belongs here and has long been planned. What we're looking at now is a major change to the approved PDSP, and a big part of that is the elimination of the public access to the streets. And one of the results of that is that there's more developable area that can make some profit. And so I would say that I concur with all of those who are stressing the importance of wide sidewalks, adequate drop-offs, bike lanes throughout, and that because there is sufficient space, we should not be working within the limitations of existing streets. If we need a little encroaching into the site in order to make room for bikes and pedestrians, that's fine. So much of the public access has been eliminated by this campus approach, and the trade-off for that has to be through the site and around all four sides of the site, that there is generous access for pedestrians and bicyclists particularly. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. Okay, so we've heard from everyone at LRPC. Before we go to public comment, I want to sum up where I see we are. My sense is that we do not need another LRPC. At this point, our comments are starting to focus more and more specifically on the sort of conversations that we have at SPRC. However, I'm not sure we're ready for an SPRC until the applicant is ready to come in, having addressed some of the comments that have been raised. And as a reminder, your SPRC applicant will look very much like this LRPC. The representatives are likely to be the very same folks you see around the table tonight. So let me just reiterate what I think the big issues are that need to be addressed, because it doesn't look like there's a lot of wiggle room on these. One is the issue around the massing, and this can be a discussion at SPRC, but the sense is that folks would like to see some options in terms of what the sculpting looks like. The middle of the buildings, more of a diverse skyline, considering making the pavilions a little bit taller and different ways to treat the facades. With regard to circulation, given that we're removing the roads from the site, we need to have a better understanding, and staff concurs with this apparently, of how those paths through the site will accommodate a variety of users. Excuse me, pedestrians and cyclists. And this came up at the first LRPC. There's a few people who've said this is really a no-go without a protected bike lane on 12th Street, given that we're changing what the circulation of this looks like. But it seems like another thing that would need to happen is a greater focus between staff, Transportation Commission, who focuses on these, on different site plans all over the community, and the applicant, to see how these changes to the site and with regard to the street grid impact the site. And then another major issue was that of universal design. Well, we do want to see more porosity of the site at Army Navy Drive. We'd like to see it without steps. This comes up over and over. I don't know if there's a way to address the topography. You've heard that there are a lot of things that the community likes about the design, and they have a lot of faith in your designers and planners to come up with some clever ways to do that. So that's my summary of the points that I've heard tonight. I'd like to go to public comment. We're almost at 9:30. Before I do that, I saw Tracy Gabriel was here from the BID. Would the BID like to say anything before we go to our 4 public commenters?
Hi there, good afternoon or evening. This is Malika Scriven. I'm representing the BID on behalf of our Executive Director, Tracy Gabriel. I think from our perspective, we'd like to just commend the team for offering some of the higher level iterations to this PDSP plan relating to building massing and circulation. From our perspective, we'd like to underscore the fact that building height and massing, we think, could be addressed more further. One of the most important aspects of the site design, obviously, is the iconic Helix building. We think using the adjacent 3 office buildings' heights to better frame the Helix as the centermost important building should be further analyzed and addressed in the next iteration. We also believe that the BID would support continuation of studying the expressive structures at the top that were previously explained, so that they're not only visually appealing to the skyline, but also functional from a sustainability standpoint. From a site connectivity standpoint, we understand that obviously the intent of the site is to be an open, publicly accessible destination, and it should not be a private insular campus. Then we think that the site circulation should surely be well integrated into the existing street network, offering multimodal, safe access and connections throughout. So those are just a few items that we'd like to underscore, and we heard further discussed in this conversation. So thank you for the time for commenting.
Thank you, Ms. Scriven. Next, I believe we had Mr. Byrne for comments.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to comment. It wasn't really a subject of this meeting, but I mentioned it before at the end of other LRPC meetings. Although they have what's called a park in the middle of the site, that most of that park is a large mowed grass lawn. This is just simply not biophilic. You have 2 parks nearby, Metropolitan Park and the one at East Street and Army Navy Drive, that both have wide, big lawns. You don't need a big lawn there. This should be either wooded or a pollinator meadow or something of that nature. It should be a natural feature. Maybe not the whole part of it, but maybe half of it. You really need to, LRPC and later on SPRC really needs to look at this, because this is Amazon may claim their project is biophilic, but it is not. Their actual pollinator meadow area is very small. It's smaller than the dog park. So you have to recognize this and not listen to what people they're saying. Because I mentioned this during the initial public, we had the first public engagement opportunity. They did nothing about it. It's a major defect. Right now, if you look at an aerial view of that whole block, there's a lot of trees there. These are all going to be destroyed. And yes, they'll plant some trees, but probably not the number that they're destroying. But the main thing is that park needs that big center lawn. Maybe half of it needs to be replaced by a pollinated meadow or woodland or something like this. That's all I have to say. And I know he didn't address it at this meeting. I don't know if they'll ever address it, even at the SRPC. But this is a very important point. After all, we do have a monarch pledge, and we're supposed to use fully pollinators. And this project just isn't doing it, despite the trees on the spiral, on the helix. Okay, that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you. And I don't know who was next, if it was Ms. Fuller or Mr. Watson.
It's Alistair Watson.
Oh, okay, Alistair, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to be quick because I want to pass over the mic as soon as possible to my friend Carol Fuller, but I just wanted to second what Ben Diavanzo and Pam Van Hine said earlier, especially what they said about accessibility for people with mobility disabilities and cyclists. If you don't get anything from what I'm going to say next, that's fine. Just get that I second that, and I write that down somehow. And I just wanted to add some more context. I was born and raised in Arlington. I'm an avid cyclist. In fact, I don't drive a car. And my best friend, who we were on the Wakefield High School crew team, which I actually coincidentally am wearing the shirt of, he is wheelchair bound. And frankly, looking at the current ecosystem, I don't feel safe riding my bike or bringing my friend down from where he lives in Penrose down to this area. And
what's going on? It didn't mute.
Bernie, you're on mute. You're off mute. And I'm going to continue.
I turn it off.
Bernie, put yourself on mute. Go ahead, Alistair.
No problem, Bernie. The other things I want to say is that to add some oomph to this is that Arlington is not Annandale, it's not Alexandria, it's not Fairfax, it's Arlington. We're one of the most historical counties in the nation, in one of the most famous nations of all time. So we have to be better, and we can be better because we attract visitors from all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Ms. Fuller.
Thank you, Commissioner Gearing. I wish to reiterate the collective concern that safe biking is only being planned by the applicant on 3 sides when 12th Street will be busy and dangerous. The Crystal City Civic Association and the Transportation Commission have both been trying to convince DES, and in particular the Transit Way folks, that 12th Street must have a protected bike lane along its entire length. Staff have even acknowledged that traffic will increase on 12th Street, so it makes no sense to only allow share rows. A PBL on 12th Street could actually even obviate somewhat the need for bike access through the middle of the park. So I wanted to reiterate what has already been said. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, with that, does staff have any final words, or may I go ahead and wrap up?
Nothing for me.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Peter? Okay. All right, well, I want to go ahead and thank everyone for a long meeting. I know it was longer than we planned, but LRPC members, we've met a few times on this, and we will be meeting again on SPRC as this comes forward. Thank you for your thoughtful comments, the time you put into this, representing your communities and your constituencies. Thank you, staff. Special thanks to Peter Schultz, who did the real-time troubleshooting at the beginning of the meeting. And thank you, all the other staff who participated tonight, listened to this conversation, and weighed in with their expertise. And thank you to the applicant, John Dale, Taylor, and Grace. We look forward to meeting again when you've had a chance to address some of these specific issues that belong under SPRC, but knowing what the constraints are and the concerns are from the community, we look forward to meeting and being more productive in the next one. So thank you, everybody. Hope you have a very good week. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everybody, for your comments.